The last thing we need to finish off is that I noticed I made a spelling mistake here on one of my variables. So that's a quick fix. Here it is, box. We'll save that. When we change a variable's name, it's going to clear out what is put in it. So we need to put in the correct ones. So answer text 0, answer text 1, and so on. 2, 3. Good. Save. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is finish off the dialog script, which is going to be a long one. And first thing we need to do is add a couple of private variables to help make things a little bit smoother. So I want to grab the text component of a couple of different text boxes. So the first one is the text box that will hold the actual dialogue. This one will hold the question text, which is at the top of the question area. This will be the answer text, which is, the answer text, which will be inside of the buttons for each answer. And this will be the name text, which is at the bottom. I want to be able to load up the current question and put that in a variable. And that's pulling the question from the scriptable object. And again, dialog. I want to pull up the dialogue's scriptable object and put that into the current conversation. And we need a bunch of ints now. So the first one is, when we look at the tree, where do we start our conversation? Do we start it at the first conversation? Do we start it later down? So that's inside of the conversation tree. The next one will be advancing through the conversation. So each person who talks will have a different number. So it's Mary, then Steve, then Peter. So as we advance through each person, we use that int to do the advance. I also want to know the maximum amount of people who are talking. And for each person who's talking, how many things do they say? So we first need to advance through them and find out what is the max that they actually say. And lastly, I want to know the avatar. So this will be the image and name of the person speaking. Okay. Now that we have that stuff completed, I want to start on a very quick method. And this will be the method that is called when we click on that dark background area to be able to exit the conversation. And it also will be used further down the line as well. And what this will do is it will set the entire dialog area to false. I also want to set the dialog question area false. And the holder that holds, the holder that holds both the text area and the question area, we also will set to false. Okay, the next one is when I click on the button that is the dialog box, well, the speech bubbles, this will open the dialog box or the question box. I need to get a method public. I need to get a method that will do this. So void open dialog, and this is going to open our dialog area. So we want to take the holder, set active to true, and the next thing we want is we want the opener, which is the speech bubble, to go away. Lastly, I'm going to create a method here in which I want to be able to tell when we do start our dialogue, is it going to be a conversation or a question? So let's get right into that method now. Before we do that method though, I'm going to create one at the top and this is because we have the ability to change whether after a conversation whether the person stays in the scene or not. So we're going to go to the conversation tree, and the in-scene variable we will switch out. And now we are able to start and ask, is this a conversation or a question? Okay, in starting this, first we need to know where we're starting at. I must have made a spelling mistake up above. C-O-N. There we go. Convo start, and I want this to be equal to, so we're going to look at the conversation tree and we want to find the start point. Second, let us set up our text component. For the text, and we want to set up the one for the name. Oops. Okay, now I want to check and see if our conversation tree and here's where we actually ask the question. Are we starting with a question or not? So if start is a question, then we need to do a couple things. First, I want to load the correct question. And which question do I want? I want the one that is at convo start. Next, I want to set the conversations avatar. And lastly, I want to be able to print that question onto the screen. I'll create those methods soon. But if it's not a question, then it's almost the same. I want to load, but this time I'm loading the dialog. And once again, I'm using convo start. Next is I want the conversations avatar. And sorry, not ask question, print our chat onto the screen. That is it for the convo our question at the beginning. Now this is being run when we first start up the dialog. It's going to check to see if it's a conversation or a question. The next thing we want to do. So I'm going to start with the dialogue first, since this is a little bit easier than the questions. So to start with the dialogue, we're going to take things in the same order that we see them here. So the first one will be we're going to load our dialogue, and this will take in an int, and we'll just call it our next conversation. So for this, our dialog text area, we need to set to true. I'm also going to set the dialog question area to false. And our current conversation, we want to load up from the conversation tree one of those conversations. And which conversation are we loading? Well, the next conversation, or the int that was passed in. So because this is a fresh loading of a conversation, then between the two people talking, we want to know who we're starting, and the person we're starting with will be the first person, so using index 0. Next, when he's talking, I want to know which thing is he saying, because he can say more than one thing. So dialog advance will be 0, so that's going to be our first one. After that, we need to know how many times does it go back and forth between two people. So that's the maximum amount of times that it goes back and forth will be equal to we're going to look at the current conversation that we've loaded up. I think I should do this conversation. If I remember correctly, it won't hold on the screen, so I want to look inside of the full conversations that are being done, and I want to count of all those conversations, and I want to -1. The next is we also, now that we've loaded that one up, I want to go and find out how many things in that first one will be done. So how many things does this one person say? So this will be from the current conversation. Once again, the full conversation. However, we'll be using our conversation advance, which is set to 0. So it's the first person. And we're going to look at the chat that they're doing, and count the amount of things that this person says in his little chat. And that is it for loading of the dialog. If everything is done correctly, load dialog, yes, is now fine. Next in the list will be our setting up of our conversations avatar. We don't pass anything in. I want to store the avatar into a variable, the int of the avatar. So we're going to look at our current conversation. So once again, for the person who's speaking, we need to know which slot we're using, and we want to know the person avatar int, because we had a list of people, and that's what this is pointing to, that list of people. So the first thing I want is our name text. So that's our component, and that's the text of the component. So we're going to set the text of the name text to the current conversation, and we have our conversation avatars, and we have the avatar int. And of that we want, I can put these on separate lines, of that we want the person's name. Next, if the current conversation, full conversation, convo advance, position, so we're not looking at the person now, we're looking at where they are. Are they on the left or are they on the right? So we're checking to see if they are on the left. If they are on the left, then we're looking for a left avatar. Set active true. We want to make sure that right avatar is set to false. Next, let's get the component, the image component of it. And once we have the component, the avatar image sprite, we can change to be equal to the current conversation. We want to look into the avatars using the avatar int, and this time we want the person's avatar. That will be for left. If we're doing for the right, I can actually just copy all of this, copy, paste, and this time I want to swap these around. Our right for our left. Same goes here. It is our right avatar that we are looking at. And this should all be good. After that, we are finished with our conversation avatar. So we've got our load dialog, our conversation avatar, and now all we need to do now is to print onto the screen. And this one is extremely simple. We're just going to take our text and the text of that text, and it will be equal to the current conversation, the full conversation, the convo advance, the chat, and the advance on that chat will be the dialog advance. And that is it to print it onto screen. So if we look back here, if we go back and forth between this and actually looking at it, we want from the full conversation, I've got size 2, this is 0, this is 1, so we're working on the full conversation and we advance through it. So that is full conversation, and we're advancing through the full conversation to get the first person. And then we've got the chat, which is set to 2, and we want to advance through their chat, which is this advance. Now I was getting an error here somewhere, and it is because we haven't created all of our methods. So that will go away once we've finished all of our code. So the next thing we want to do is that these are all fine when we open our dialog. Something is misspelled between that. Oh, the R. So when we open our dialog, we're going to run for the first time. We're going to check if it's a dialog, we're going to run it. And that's everything that runs. But this only happens, that only happens if it is a first time opening. So what else do we need then? If that's the first time opening, then we're going to need that whenever we click on our conversation bar, we advance through the list. So it's not a first opening, it's an advancing. So the first thing we want to do when we're advancing through this list is I want to check if our conversation advance, this is the back and forth between two people, has reached its limit. So we're on the last person talking. And if the dialogue advance, so how many things this last person is saying, has also reached its limit. So in other words, at the beginning we have nothing else to advance on. There is nothing else we can do. So what's going to happen? What are we going to try and find out now? We want to find out we want to ask another question. We want to say, we're finished with this conversation. So I want to find out, at the end of this conversation, are we supposed to alter what happens for the conversation tree? Do we alter where we start the next time we run the conversation? If we are going to alter it, then we need to know what's going to happen. So we need our convo tree, and it's a conversation start point that we're altering, and that will be equal to our current conversation start int. That is what we find at the end. So when Sally talked to Mark and Mark talked to Sally, after the conversation, we want to know here, do we alter our next conversation? So these things can be turned on or off, and the int is going to be pointing to our conversation tree saying find something in one of these indexes. The next thing we want to do, we want to find an index, but I also want to change And I want to know, is the start a question or is it a dialogue? So for this, we want to also find current conversation dot start is question. So that will be filled in if I checked, where is it? If I checked that the start is a question, so I want to say I want to alter my start, it's going to go to this index and it is a question, which means in my conversation tree, this will be set to 0, this will be turned on, which means element 0 in the questions is what's going to be selected. Save. So that's it if we are altering our start. So we've got to the end of everything and we're altering our start. Now then, when we've got into the end of everything, I want to check one more thing. If current conversation dot ask question, if that is true, it means that after the conversation's done, do I just close the conversation or do I go directly to a question? You could modify this script to allow yourself to say, after the conversation is done, am I asking a question, am I exiting, or am I moving on to another conversation? So you can actually have a little bit more complex. This is simple, I just want to go to a question. What you can do is you can create an enum here that would ask moving to question, moving to conversation, or exiting. So right now, if ask question is turned off, I will just exit because I have nothing else to do. So if we're going to ask a question, what do we need to do? Well, we're going to load. Nope, we're not going to load dialog. We're going to load. Oh, I haven't created the method yet, so that's why it's not auto-completing. And I want to pass in the current conversation question. So in other words, the question that's being asked, or that could be an int of some sort. So this is an int being passed in to load question. Next, what do we want? We want to load up our avatar for a question. And lastly, I want to ask the question. And then we just want to return out of this. So this looks very much the exact same as this. Load question, the avatar, and ask the question. So this is if the conversation is done and we're asking a question, we're going to do that. If we're not asking a question, in my case, you can do this, else if, and then say, I want to go to a conversation, but in my case, I don't want to go to a conversation, I just want to exit. So the first thing I want to do is, I want to know do I want to remove the NPC? Because this actually is a question we can ask down here. When the conversation's over, does the NPC get removed? So I just want to do this, where I have that, remove NPC, and if I put in the current conversation, remove NPC, this will prove true or false. If I turn this to true, then this will send true. If I click on this, it'll send true into remove NPC. And this is remove NPC, and this would set in scene to true, but that's not what we want. We want to be able to say that it is inversed, so he'll be out of scene. So to inverse that, I'm just going to do this and say the opposite of whatever that was. Next, we are going to click exit, and let me just return out of this to stop everything. So this was asking if it's a question, do I do any of these things? This one was asking if we're done with the conversation. We're saying we've got into the end of the conversation, what do we do? However, what if I just want to advance through the conversation? We're not finished the conversation. Well, the first thing I want to do is ask a question. The people who are talking, have I gotten to the last person yet? Or sorry, we haven't gotten to the last person. If a person's talking, have I gotten to the last thing he said? So this is the last thing he said. I want to take the advance and reset it. So it'll be the first thing the next person says, and to find out who the next person is, I'm going to take the convo advance and add 1 to it. So it will be the next person, and it would be, this means go to the next person, this means reset for the first person, the next person, the first thing the next person will say. Now, because it's a new person and he might be saying a different amount of things, I need to reset the max. And we just advanced it, so that advance would be now 1. We want to find out in the chat. How many things does he chat about? -1. So we've advanced to the next chat. It's still the same person, but we've advanced to the next chat. No, it's a new person, so the new person's going to need I just hit some hotkey there and it's doing something. I don't know what it was doing. Get out of that. Okay, so since this is a new person, expecting, why does it say it? There we go. It's a new person, so we need a new avatar. And lastly, we're going to print the chat to the screen and save that. So that is advancing to the next person and the first thing that person says. However, we haven't reached the end of what this person's saying, so this is a simple advance. I'm just going to take the dialog advance and let's just push it along. And since the dialog has advanced, we can now print it to the screen. This ends the entire stuff for the conversations. Now we have 3 things to create for our avatars, for our questions. So let's move on into the questions. So our public void load question, and we were passing in an int. Which question are we loading up? Good. So I want my dialog text area then I'll be equal to false, and I want our dialog question area to be set to true. and the question will be, our current question is going to be equal to our conversation tree, and in that tree we go and look for the question that is in slot question int, and that is loading the question. The next thing we had to do is set up the question's avatar. So this is going to be very similar to the conversation avatar, with a couple of small changes. So first things first, all we need is the name, and we can get that from the current question, and we have the questioner. That's where we put the name in. Next, if the current question, and we want to know what side the questioner is on, is equal to, and we're pulling from that left, right, again, left. So if they are on the left, then we want our left avatar to be set to active, and that means that our right avatar should be set to false. Next, image, and this is just like how we did it before. We want our avatar image. It's going to be our left avatar. Get the component of image, and then we want to use it. So avatar image dot sprite is going to be equal to the current question, and we have our questioner image. Just copy, because if it's not on the left, then it's on the right. So we shut down the right, we turn on the right, turn off the left. We get this from the right, and we are good. And that ends our question avatar. Save. So the last thing we need is just to ask the question now. And when we ask this question, let's see what we need. We're going to need our dialog question area, and we want to set that to true. We want to see our question area, which means that our dialog text area is going to be set to false. The text for the question are the text component for the question. The question dot get component text, and therefore the question text dot text is going to be equal to our current question dot the question. Good. Now, here I want to loop through, not true, loop, not an if, sorry. I want for, so I want to loop through the different options that we have. So in this question, in the current question, there are some options. I want to count the options. So we looped through all of the options that we created. I think I created 3 in the demo that we did. And I want to ask if our current question, and let's check the options, see what's in option I, first option. I want to look at the text and find out if it's not empty. If it's not empty, then a question exists. So the options with a small t, I, answer box object, you want to set active to true. Now this answer box object is set up, we are pulling that from all the way up here where we set up a class called the options, and we have answer box object and answer box text, and we made a change to answer box text at the beginning of this. So all the way back down, so we set that box, that button, to be true. Next thing we want to do is we want the answer text, it's going to be the options dot I dot answer box text, and we want to get the component and now we can use it to say answer the answer text dot text. So we just got the component for this particular option, and the text of it is going to be equal to our current question, the option, and the option text. And that is us asking the question. So it's going to go through, we have 3 questions, it'll open or turn on the answer box object, which is the actual button. It's going to get the component for it, and then it's going to set the text of that component to whatever text we put in there. And that is the end of the ask questions. So the last thing we need to do is when I click on one of those question buttons, one of those answer buttons, what's going to happen? So we need a public void, and we'll call it question click, and I want to pass in an int, and I want to know which button did I click on. So first thing I want to do is I want to reset some of these, the options 0 dot answer box object set active false. So I just want to do some resetting here. Next, I want to ask the current question, the options, and this will be question int. I'm going to use that a lot, so question int. Do I want to alter the start? So this is kind of the same thing we did with our conversation. So the convo tree the start point is going to be equal to the start int. Next I can copy all this, and I want to know, is the start a question? And we can just change this out for start as question. Save. The next question to ask if the current question when the question's over, are we going anywhere with it? Do we go somewhere or do we just exit? So if we are going somewhere, where are we going? That is not how you spell going.